Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live. I am thrilled to have Pablo Dominguez with me today, who I've actually met in person. And I was just thrilled to hear that he had a new book coming out, which is What a Unicorn Knows. And the subtitle here is How Leading Entrepreneurs Use Lean Principles to Drive Sustainable Growth. So, all things, as you know, that I am very interested in. And so I'm really happy to have Pablo here today to talk about his book. Pablo is in his day job, an operating partner for sales and customer success at Insight Partners, and has co-authored this book with Matthew E. May, who I think we know as Matt. But let me bring you forward. Thanks so much for coming today, Pablo.
Karen, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So congratulations on the release of your book. If your experience was anything like mine, it was a labor of love, and happy to be through the labor part. I hope you're
Yep.
enjoying it.
Absolutely. Lots of work.
Yeah. So let's just start with a quick definition of a unicorn.
Yeah. So the definition of a unicorn was coined actually by Cowboy Ventures, Eileen. And as it was originally intended, it was any company that was valued over $1 billion, predominantly in the US at the time. And I think the term now is honestly more focused on companies that are private being valued at a billion versus necessarily public companies that have reached that status. But on average, about 150 companies are minted each year that make that leap to unicorn status. 2021 was an anomaly where we saw over 500 companies being minted just given the growth. But on average, it's a very unique place to be in terms of reaching a milestone. Obviously, most companies' ultimate goals are to become public and build a great product and scale to a certain size. But that first milestone of being minted as a unicorn is pretty significant for any founder or anybody working in the company.
Yeah, those are pretty incredible stats that you just gave, by the way. I don't want to let those slip by, that on average, 100 and something, maybe 200 unicorns a year are minted or birthed, as you say in the book.
Yep.
And then there was a unicorn baby boom where we had like 500. I get pitched for things that I do, like my LinkedIn Live, and it seemed like every week I was getting a new unicorn, right, that wanted to be on. I was
Right.
like, how could there be so many? But it truly was a baby boom brought on, of course, by the digital acceleration that happened during the pandemic. So now that we're sort of back to normal and the market is not pulling or pushing quite so many companies through this status, why do some companies become unicorn and others don't? What seem to be the big impediments or the big drivers for that?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at who makes it or who doesn't, right? A lot of it does have to do with leadership, with
Hmm.
the how companies decide to continue on their path. What the premise of the book is, what we've observed over the 10, 11 years that Matt May, who's my co-author, and I have been working both in public companies, a startup that I was at before I joined Insight, and then now at Insight, working with over 500 of our portfolio companies. You get a lot of visibility into what makes a company successful, right? And
Mm.
we've tried to outline from a lean perspective, and lean, for those that may not be familiar with the term, really comes from, or it gets attributed more so to optimization in manufacturing or in
Yes.
product. And we've tried to apply that to go to market because that's how we've been working with lean principles for the last 10, 11 years. And so the companies that we've observed that not only make it to unicorn status but continue to the next stage, right? Whether it might be getting to $100 million in revenue or ultimately becoming public. And we talked about the numbers. It's a very exclusive club to get to each of those steps, right? Those companies are all very focused in what they do, right? And it's sort of what we
Hmm.
talk about in our first principle, strategic speed, in terms of being laser focused on where you are going to play and where you're not going to play. And they embody the 5 elements that we talk about in the book. So someone might ask, well, hey, which one of these elements that you're going to talk about is most critical? The most successful companies we see sort of embodying all 5 elements, principles, if you will, and that's what makes them successful. So it's
Yeah.
it's
So
both.
the answer is yes, right?
Yes.
Which of these? Yes.
Of the
Yeah,
above.
exactly. Yeah. So I one of the things that I tell my clients is it's not about the technology, or at least it's rarely about the technology. You need to have a product market fit, but once you have a product market fit, it's all the other stuff that either gets in your way or accelerates your journey. Could you go through the 5 elements, your acronyms for the unicorn model? I think those are the things that are not necessarily the technology that support getting to unicorn status.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a great point, right? Obviously, everything starts with the product market fit, right? If you've got that, ostensibly everything else should fall into place if you do the right things. If you don't have that, nothing will technically save you, right? So above all else, you need that foundation of
Right.
product market fit. Yeah. So the principles elements that we've built have a good sort of, we've called it scale, which is easy to remember, and it's 5 versus 22 because no one will remember
And
22
it's
things.
fun, right? It's fun. Scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Scale, right? Because everybody wants to scale. And so in order of the terms, right, we start with strategic speed, and I'll come back to what that is. C is, constant experimentation, the companies that are, innovating constantly, et cetera. A for accelerated value, L for lean process, and then E is esprit de corps, right? So it's sort of the glue that holds everything together, the culture of the company, the leadership
Yeah.
that sort of embodies everything that the company is about.
Yeah. Terrific. So I just want to say those again for people who are following along. Strategic speed, constant experimentation, innovation, accelerated value, lean process, and esprit de corps for all scaling. So yeah, let's go back to strategic speed. What does that mean? And in the book, you talk about each of these having a target, right? So sort of the dark side that they combat. So in the sense of strategic speed, you could also talk about the target.
Yeah, and so we talk about we leverage F1, Formula One, a lot.
Yay.
And I know, if for those of you that have not caught up on Netflix, or maybe you don't watch Netflix, but there's a phenomenal series called Drive to Survive, which has multiple seasons out, which really brings to light what happens with Formula One. And the reason we talk about Formula One a lot and it embodies lean so much is because the amount of efficiency, the amount of
Hmm.
experimentation, the clarity on strategy, the application of lean actually principles to make the racing ecosystem so efficient, right?
Mhm.
But let me start with, and so a lot of the terms that we use sort of tie to that. So when you say, the first principle, strategic speed, one of the targets we talk about is drag, right? Obviously, when you're racing, you've got drag that's slowing you down on the track. No different in a company, you might have misalignment on your strategy, right, which is slowing you down. People maybe are heading in different directions, et cetera. So having alignment across the business at the CEO level, CEOs, direct reports, but even the
Yeah.
the individual people that are doing their jobs, they want to understand what is our purpose, right? What are we focusing on, et cetera. And so strategic speed is all about, and it gets sort of muddied sometimes around strategic planning, right, which is that process that every company goes through every year on budgeting and are we
Mhm.
gonna are we gonna add more people, et cetera. That's not necessarily strategy. Strategy is really choosing what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And I think in this current turbulent time that we're in, it's even more applicable because you've got to make tough choices, right? Because you've got limited dollars at play, resources, et cetera. And so minimizing that drag to move as efficiently as possible is super critical.
Yeah. And I'm imagining, actually, I know from my experience as well, that part of the sorting out where to place your strategic targets comes from the constant experimentation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the second principle, the companies that we see, do things very successfully are always experimenting. And I think experimentation, similar to lean, might be attributed to like, hey, we know product is always doing MVPs, right? They roll out
Right.
products, they test it, et cetera. From a go-to-market perspective, the companies that we see successful are always experimenting as well, right? You've got an idea about deploying resources differently, and rather than do it for the whole team, maybe you test it in one of your markets in Europe, right? Or
Mm.
maybe you test it in, depending on how you tier your accounts, you test it with tier 3 accounts versus tier 1 and 2, or in a certain region, sub-region, right? So there's ways to experiment constantly to make sure you are doing the right thing, iterating, and always looking to drive excellence. And it's interesting because in Formula One, they limit the amount of
Right.
experimentation that is
Yeah.
allowed, right? It's actually fascinating. Like you cannot be too efficient. It's like there's limits on limitation, which obviously in business we never have those constraints. But when we work with our companies or when we're giving advice, we're always recommending to definitely test things before you put them into play. So then you can have hypotheses to either, go against and implement better solutions.
Yeah. By the way, I love the all the F1 analogies because it's so true. I think sports in general, but F1 being such a high speed sport, that it maps beautifully to hypergrowth companies, which is a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because speed, I had a boss years ago who had told us, people get a sense like, oh, these new companies are coming in. It's the David versus Goliath, right? The
Mm,
small new entrant will displace the heavyweights, the 800-pound gorillas that exist. And he would always say it's not the small that beat the big, it's the fast that beat the slow. Right. And
mm,
that's sort of what we see here is how quickly you can get to market, how quickly you can, get in front of your customers, drive innovation, change, adapt to change also tends to be a larger determinant of success than necessarily being the smaller entrant. You can be small trying to fight the big giant, but if you're not moving quickly enough, the next person will
yeah.
catch up to you or you'll never catch up to your competitor.
Yeah, I think about that. I call that my SAP continuum.
Yeah.
So, or sorry, SOP, standard operating procedure
Yep.
to seat of the pants, right? And you want
Yep.
to be somewhere on that SOP continuum. What happens with companies over time is they get too stuck on the standard operating procedure and they can't move more towards seat of the pants in response to situations,
Right.
which is one of the things Formula One is so awesome at. That literally from tire change to tire change, they can figure things out, which is
Yeah,
really
and it's
great.
you bring up a good point because we've had a couple of people say like, "Hey, this is a great book, but it seems like it's tailored more towards, startups or early stage scale ups." And I would argue if you're a public company, right? Like because you mentioned it today, and I worked at two large public companies. There
Mhm.
is a not for every company, but the larger you get, right, there is definitely more drag, there's
Correct.
inertia, there's friction, more waste, sort of the targets that we talk about in the book. And the elements that we talk about here are actually applicable to any size company, right? If you're trying to be more innovative, there's no reason why you can't be more aligned on your strategy or, constantly experimenting. I'll jump to the third principle,
Yes.
which is accelerated value, right? Which again, keeping on the focus of speed, how quickly are your customers realizing the value that you are providing to them, right? Because the quicker I can achieve the value of your solution, the more likely I am to continue to use it, right? Drive higher adoption, which drives higher NPS for you, which makes me want to buy more of that product probably and probably buy additional things that you might come to me and say, "Hey, you love this product so much. Guess what else we can do to solve your problems," right? So that time to get the customer realizing value as quickly as possible is extremely, extremely critical because anytime they're not realizing value is time that somebody else has an opportunity to come in and help them realize value with a different solution.
Mhm. Yeah. Or just general friction
Yep.
develops, all right, against, oh, I thought I mean, I do this all the time, right? I think I need this new app. And so I download it and then I never use it.
Right.
And you do that inside companies too. You're like, oh, this would be a really wonderful, I understand your value proposition. It'd be
Yeah.
great for us. I buy it. And then I never have time to get back to use it. And so I don't get the value. Maybe I tried it once or twice and I didn't quite get through it. So
Absolutely.
accelerated value is huge.
Yep. And then the fourth one is really about process, right?
Mhm.
And if we stay on the F1 example, you mentioned it before, and I've talked about it a little bit, so maybe people know this, but maybe they don't. The fastest F1 pit stop ever recorded, and it's not that it's drastically different from the average, by the way,
Right.
was 1.82 seconds. So let's think about that for a second. A race car comes off the track, and four tires come off, and four tires come on in the shorter amount of time than it takes you to pick up a pen and write your initials on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
I know
That's
that
like,
because we've tested that.
what is
It's
it? Elephant. So one elephant, two elephant, car has come in and gone.
Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing, right? And so
Yeah.
how did they get that, right? It was all about eliminating as much waste in the process. And if you think about lean
Mhm.
process, it's literally just the elimination of waste, right? And so
Yeah.
if you think about your customer only wants to pay for value that you add, right? And
Mhm.
so if you think about whatever you're selling to your customer, not everything you provide them is high value add, right? I am paying for value add work. I'm also paying for non value add work. There are elements of what you provide that I don't really care about, but I know it's important, right? Like you getting SOC 2 compliance, I know is critical, but like I don't want to pay for that, but it's embedded in the cost. Then there's waste, things that I literally do not care about as a customer that you have to do to get this product out. And so the key here is eliminating as much of that waste, right? So if you think about
Mm.
back to F1, any second or millisecond not spent on the track is waste, right? Because I need to be on the track to win the race, right? And so minimizing how much time I come off of the track to get a pit stop is even more critical.
Mm.
By the way, the average time, for those of you thinking like, wow, 1.82 seconds is crazy, the average time is about 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's still, it's three elephants to your point, Karen. It's not, so maybe it's double
Right.
the time, but it's still ridiculously fast, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about F1 and how efficient they are is that there are emergency rooms across the world that have reached out to F1 and brought their teams in
Mm.
to figure out how, and we talk about this in the book, right? How do they make the ER more effective? And if you think about like, well, hey, how does that tie? If you think about an emergency room, I've never been in an emergency room, but we've all seen TV shows, right? There's a
Mm.
doctor and there's another doctor and there's nurses and there's all these people around a human being carrying different tools and they're moving around. And it's really no different than an F1 pit stop, right? Car comes
Yeah.
in and there's 20 something people involved in the process. And so the ER room is actually very inefficient. And so they've brought in, which is kind of sad if you think about it, right? That someone's life is on a table and that is less efficient than a car changing tires.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just amazing that they've taken the best of the best in the world, the F1 pit crews, to bring them in to figure out how do we treat human lives more effectively on an operating table and learn from the best of where to position yourself. Again, eliminating the waste of moving around, having tools not in the right place. It's actually pretty fascinating, which again, sometimes companies think, well, let me look at the best person in my industry or
Mm.
in my space so I can be like them. And the feedback we always give is you should look at who is best at what you're trying to solve. It doesn't matter if they
Mhm.
make toothpicks or if they cut grass. There's something to be learned from the best in something else and apply it to your business, which we think is fascinating, which is really what lean is all about.
Yeah. Yeah. You were speaking to I have an industrial engineering degree, and so I I'm efficiency in my core,
Yep.
but really it's effectiveness, right? It's you don't want to just be you can't just be the fastest because sometimes you see these cars that try to leave and they're not quite ready to leave, right? And that ends up costing you even more. So
Yeah.
it's really important.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up because, and Matt and I talk about this a lot. People talk about efficiency as if it's we've got to grow efficiently. There's a reason we chose sustainable growth versus efficiency.
Yes.
Efficiency is about doing things right. And if you think
Hmm.
about that on its own, you're like, okay, we want to do things right. Effectiveness is about doing the right things.
Hmm.
The example I use a lot is, and I'll stick with sports, right? You can go 0 and 16, so lose all 16 games in a season in whatever sport you want. Let's just pretend there's 16 games. That's very efficient, right? You did it was wrong things, but you lost all 16 games. You were very efficient, but that wasn't effective, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a balance of being effective and efficient at the same time, but not just focusing on efficiency.
Yeah. And sustainable growth. And again, I think this applies to large companies as well as small companies, right? It has to
Absolutely.
be something that's scalable and repeatable. If it's one off, you've wasted a lot of resources making that thing happen one time.
Yeah, and that's go back to your original question. Like the best companies have figured out a way to build a business model, again, to your point, assuming I have good product
Mhm.
market fit, that is sustainable, whether
Yeah.
we are in a boom period or there's an economic downturn. And of course, in an economic downturn, everybody feels some pain, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what happens. But you want to sustain that downturn, right? Versus your business being destroyed. And so building your business to be able to weather the storm and then accelerate out of the storm is extremely critical.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, given our time constraints, I want to move us along
Yep.
to esprit de corps, which of course is for me the linchpin to all the rest of this. And I think perhaps for you as well. So talk a bit about that, if you will.
Yeah, Esprit de Corps is all about the culture. right? And do you have the right people? Do you have the right leaders in place that can bring all the elements together, right? So there isn't one element that's more important than the others. In fact, we talk about it in the book, like what a unicorn knows is that how to leverage the five elements, right? Whether they're together or I focus on one first. But esprit de corps, in my mind, is probably the most critical. I'll counter myself here. It's probably most critical because it is the glue that keeps everything together, right? And one thing Matt and I talk about is there's I don't know who said like culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Which
Hmm.
and everybody sort of believes that. What Matt and I talk
Variously
about is
attributed. Yeah.
yeah, Matt and actually talk about strategy and culture share the same meal, right?
Mm.
Because if culture eats strategy for breakfast, culture without strategy basically is nothing, right? Strategy without culture is also nothing. You need both
Right.
in tandem. And so the companies that we've seen be most successful have very strong leadership teams, very strong focus. They hire well. People want to work there. They have strong beliefs. And
Hmm.
the company again is very focused on where they're going to go.
Great. I'd say they hire well and they fire well.
They hire
It
well and
is,
fire well. Yeah, they constantly making sure they've got the best team
yeah,
available to accomplish what they want to accomplish.
yeah, terrific. Well, so that's scale. Thank you for going through those for us. I also wanted to speak with you about sort of this in action. So I work, as you do, with a number of successful CEOs who came to this role after being successful CROs. And I've thought about this a lot. I think it's in large because they really understand the go to market model and how to be successful in that. And that it's these five elements actually that make that happen. What's your experience and what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think as long as a leader that's going to become a CEO understands the customer journey, right? Like
Hmm.
what is the customer going through and how do we add value and what are the different go-to-market elements all the way from product to marketing to sales to post-sales and can connect the dots
Hmm.
can be a very successful CEO, right? Because you do have to understand where the customer is coming from, what value we drive, how we are different from our competitors. So I definitely do think it's a leap that leaders traditionally in the sales revenue side can make if they are more holistic in terms of how they're thinking go to market. Because some leaders don't, right? They think about their silo, whether they're in sales or
Right.
marketing or finance. And I think the best CEOs can look across the entire spectrum and focus on the entire go to market model.
Yeah. I think the other things that are most important, well, for senior leaders in general, but CEOs specifically and CROs, is they're comfortable with ambiguity, which CROs
Yep.
face every quarter, if not
Yeah.
more frequently. But they have comfort with not knowing everything. They're able to manage complexity, and they have a bias for action. And it's this tension between the ambiguity and the action that they've somehow mastered or made peace with
Yeah.
that allows them to
I'll add
function successfully.
Let me add two
Yeah,
more. I think the sales
please.
leader also has a tendency to be more rah with their team, right? Because the sales is all
Mm,
about the energy and stuff. And I think that brings a different
right.
element to the company. I guess every, leader is different. But the other element that I think is super critical is in sales, you get told no 99 out of
Mm,
100 times. And if you
yeah,
can't pick yourself up and go to the next call and deal with the customer, and so as a leader, the number of times you're going to see failure in your company, things not working well, et cetera, requires discipline and balance and being able to stay, above the negativity. And I think leaders that have experienced that constantly have a head up, on their peers potentially on, being focused and balanced.
yeah, terrific. Thanks for that addition. So, Pablo, just to end today, my consulting practice, the tagline is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the two by two matrix where we always want to be. I wonder if there was a moment in your own career, maybe not so much as an author, but now as an operating partner, but your career in total, there was a moment where you knew you were moving up and to the right to that spot on the matrix where we want to be.
That's a good question. I don't know if it was a moment, but I know early on in my career, I was always given the opportunity to do things that were years above my pay grade or level.
Mhm.
And my bosses brought me along to meetings I had no business being in, whether it was boardrooms, whether it was
Mhm.
C-level discussions. And one to present, right? It wasn't just there a fly on a wall, otherwise you wouldn't be invited. But I was always dragged along to participate in these meetings, and I was given exposure to how
Mhm.
decisions were made, how leaders think, what are the debates, how's the work I'm doing being impacted. And I think that prepared me and gave me the opportunity, one, because it gave me visibility, right? So I got a chance to present when I should not have had any reason to be in
Yeah.
that room. So somebody believed in me. And so I've imparted that on myself as a leader to my team. And I know sometimes I get slack for, hey, why are you bringing this person here, et cetera. But I think those moments are what started my trajectory up and to the right. So
All right. Well, thanks so much. So again,
thank
we were
you.
speaking today with Pablo Dominguez. His new book, What a Unicorn Knows, available at all channels and well worth the read. Thanks again, Pablo, for making time to be with us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Take good care.